Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Jay Christopher King, who is running the Experiencer Group. And can you please tell people a little bit about that?
Hi, Deb. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Jay Christopher King, as you just said. I'm a co-founder and the director of the Experiencer Group, which is a unique community online and IRL. It started online in 2021 as a Pay What You Wish member site. You don't have to pay anything. Pay What You Wish member site dedicated to support, curiosity, and community for people who've lived through anomalous events of any and all kinds. So this isn't just UAP, as in like what people conventionally think of as UFOs. We have a lot of non-human intelligence experiencers, people that have had contact experience through meditation, they've believed, out-of-body experiencers, near-death experiencers, people that have had precognitive dreams, apparitions, situations where people live in environments that they consider to be haunted. It's a really wide range. ESP, Psi. It's a very wide range of experiencers. There's more bias, I guess, in some ways towards those that have had UAP and related encounters as kind of the center point. And that's probably due to the founding members and who they were and what modalities they had. But it's a wide range. Yeah, and we operate a private social media site that people can find at www.forexperiencers.com. Yeah, and we have a private social media board. And it kind of looks like a traditional social media site, but really the heart of the Experiencer Group are weekly Zoom sessions, sometimes more than weekly, that are thematic and also a strong spine of support sessions as well.
I actually just got really excited because you said in experiences during meditation, because I've had some of the strangest things happen during meditation. So I'm glad to see that you're validating people and they're really wide ranging experiences. That's exciting. Um, so what do you think has been most effective for supporting other people having anomalous experiences?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that's been most effective for helping people that have had anomalous experiences is having several hours long support sessions very regularly, having a specific format for those meetings, as support sessions often do, so that people know what to expect when they walk in the door, for things to be moderated, um, so that people can feel a sense of order when they're talking about things that are sensitive and challenging. Um, I think that in this situation, that one of the most effective elements is to have a private community that anybody can apply towards. And there's just three simple questions to get in the door. But once they do get in that door, then there's a lot of openness within this private community. So people don't have to worry about trolls. They don't have to worry about whether their boss is going to see that they think that they've seen a ghost or a UAP. And then it opens up the possibility for these experiencers to compare notes and be able to post and talk with each other and say, has anybody else seen XYZ at XYZ time? Or, has anybody else experienced strange synchronicities that coincide with their UAP experiences? And other such questions that are a little bit sensitive and a little bit challenging. Those elements that really get towards the kind of high strangeness effects that people often talk about as being a lot of the detail that happens around these encounters.
What would you say the roadblocks have been for helping other people? What kind of gets in the way?
there are a few things that get in the way that are roadblocks for helping people in a situation like this. First of all, like in a lot of mental health situations and physical health situations, people need to realize that they need help, or people and people need, people have to want that help for themselves. And one thing that can be challenging with regard to anomalous experiences and kind of facing them can be those high strangeness effects, where, say, there are a lot of situations where people have UAP encounters, for example, and they feel that they've seen elements that would suggest that time had somehow slowed down, that there's some kind of strange time element, and they don't know why. And even just elements like that, if you go back into the historical record, people would edit out those details about their encounters because they seemed too weird, right? And we lost a lot of data because of that, as researchers, and potentially for people in the mental health space, that's a lot of data lost. Now, also, along those lines, there's the pathology element, and people wondering whether other people are going to think that they have more severe mental health questions like schizophrenia or other illnesses, and so they might even start to wonder for themselves whether they have those. So there can be sometimes the roadblock is for the experiencer themselves in terms of kind of moving 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back in terms of how much they want to engage with this subject matter. I know some people that, for example, within the UAP space, say, I know a guy off the top of my head, who I won't name, of course, who saw in the air above his backyard kind of a classic translucent, almost like a jellyfish type creature, right? Or some kind of like something that seemed kind of billowing and incandescent and flowing. And that may seem very strange, but if one reads the work of somebody like John Keel, there are tons and tons of reports of similar sightings going back decades. So this person saw this, and then around the same time, this person had a precognitive dream, right? And that precognitive dream was about another situation. And then that precognitive situation came to pass within a couple of weeks. Well, that person became really, really, really interested, and pretty obsessed with looking at nuts and bolts UFO data. Now, the interesting thing there is that nothing about that encounter really points towards nuts and bolts craft encounters, right? We saw something that looked biological, seemingly, and then the experience of a precognitive dream. But see, there's this road that in some ways one could present that there's a weird roadblock bias where people tend to gravitate towards the niches that they feel most comfortable with. And sometimes those are quite adjacent or maybe different altogether than the experiences that they themselves had. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think the rabbit holes are problematic. That's what I call them, the rabbit holes. I always say, this is what I tell people. People have heard me say this a lot. Don't look at just the trees, look at the whole forest. Spend some time on each tree and then pay attention to what's going on with the forest. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it.
right. So, since this video is geared towards educating mental health professionals and doctors, do you have something you wanted to say to those people who might have someone who says they're an experiencer come into their office at some point? What advice would you give
Sure.
them?
Sure. Well, if they're watching this video, then I'd like to congratulate them for getting this far into this question. I think that's great. I think that it's important to reserve judgment in a situation like that, which is often the case with professionals like that. I think that it's that removing the stigma associated with some of these encounters and being able to process and move forward for some of those professionals while realizing that they may have misdiagnosed people for many, many years and may have had many clients that they've misdiagnosed for many, many years. That is a strong possibility for a lot of folks. And, you know, I think that it's going to be a challenge in the days ahead for people to move forward while the processing and having the mental energy going back to prior cases that they've had and recognizing that mistakes may have been made. I mean, that happens all the time anyway, but in this specific scenario, recognizing that the world is much stranger, truly much stranger than we've been told, while doing the hard work of having a kind of retrospective analysis of what one's done in the past. I could see for many, many people that being a point that could be paralyzing. So my heart goes out to them, and I appreciate them for moving forward and working with experiencers in a hopefully non-judgmental framework.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving them advice. Is there any final advice you want to give to people regarding how they interact with experiencers in general? I also want to point out that a lot of people jump to trying to do more research with experiencers, and I kind of flinch when people talk about that. Do you have final advice for people just dealing with experiencers in general?
Yeah, yeah, I think that I think that your inclination to flinch is right on. I think that there are some really good efforts being made these days in terms of professionals that are doing work with experiencers. I think the work of Gary Nolan is quite great in that regard. There are others that are working that way. But yes, I agree. There are kind of parallel tracks where people jump to looking to experiencers as a kind of content factory. Podcasters look at them that way, that they'll be able to give them a great spooky story for their show. And even well-intentioned researchers will try to get a study together real quick and convince themselves that their study is better than other studies that they might not even know about at that point. And that can be a little tricky. There does need to be a lot of work done, but it's important to recognize that the experiencers themselves have been marinating in this and processing it and thinking about it often for much of their lives. I've had my own anomalous experiences going back to when I was a small child. And so at this point, I've had almost 40 years to think about these encounters and process them and try to integrate them into a bigger worldview. So it's important, I think, for researchers to humble themselves, to truly humble themselves and recognize that these experiencers often know a lot more about what they're talking about than it may appear at first to them. And they may know quite a bit more or have reasonable guesses about what they've been experiencing, much more so than somebody that is just jumping into this from recent news headlines. That said, you know, in many ways, the more the merrier, in that we need many more people to be taking these issues seriously and working through them methodically. So, in answer to your question, I think that having a relatively delicate touch in trying to approach experiencers is helpful. I think that being caring being open-minded and being non-judgmental is extraordinarily helpful. And recognize to not edit out the details from the experiencer that you might find troubling or difficult to process. There are many, many, many details for many experiencers that seem to go against the understanding that we have of how the world works, or how physics work, or how time works, or space, or advanced technology. Many details in cases are easily, our conventional expectations are blown away rather quickly. And so if medical professionals, mental health professionals can really put any kind of bias aside, if somebody says that they're levitating, that they're made to levitate through some form of technology, it's quite possible that that actually happened, as strange as that seems. And it gets much, much stranger from that point forward. So, yeah, I think that would be a starting point. Yeah,
I always say it's strange for the Western society,
that's
right?
right.
But not
That's a
so
very
much,
good point.
not the Eastern. And I always really emphasize we need to be considering cultural biases that people have when they're
That's
treating people,
that's
especially.
absolutely right. Keep
Mhm.
going. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's we get trained that way as mental health professionals. We get trained that we're supposed to be aware of biases and avoid them. We're supposed to be more open-minded and let people come in with their own beliefs and not try to nudge them away from those beliefs. And it's just interesting that when it comes to this topic, if someone says, I believe the UFO I saw was blah, 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 someone wants to fill in the blah, blah, blah for them and really push them a certain way with it. And I don't think they should.
I completely agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more, Deb. I absolutely agree with you. And you're right about the cultural bias. I mean, um, one could look at, for example, the work of Artie Six Color Clark, who did a great job doing kind of uh, survey work, looking from kind of an anthropological perspective, looking at Native American and Central American cultures and what they experienced with regard to non-human intelligence and other advanced beings of various types. And there's more work being done by people like Dr. Stephen Finley and Dr. Marcus Red, that are getting into kind of African cosmologies. I think that work is really important. It was even touched on in Randall Nickerson's great documentary called Aerial Phenomenon, looking at what the local beliefs or the local understanding of some of those sightings were. I think it's really important that you bring that up, and it's just another level with which we need to humble ourselves with regard to these enduring mysteries.
Right. And thank you so much for coming and sharing, and so much for what you do. I know a lot of people turn to you for support. We actually have the group that you run listed under experiencer support on the UFO connector. And I strongly encourage people who need assistance to come and ask if that's the good match for them. Do you have
Sure.
any final things that you just want people to hear about providing assistance to experiencers?
Sure. I think recognizing that there is quite a lot of literature out there is good. Um, if folks haven't looked into the work of people like, say, of course, Dr. John Mack or Bud Hopkins or others, those could be great places to start with regard to this material. Uh, I think in terms of helping experiencers out, I'm glad to see that there are a lot of grassroots initiatives that are coming about. I'm glad that organizations like UAP Med exist, and organizations like Opus, and even like Yvonne Smith's longstanding CIRO. It's great to know that there have been support networks that have been going on for a while, and that we're not just kind of coming from nothing, but there is a history of this going back to the 80s at least within this field. And so if people are looking to provide something to be able to kind of move into this space in a helpful way, I'd suggest looking at what's already in the field, what's already happened, even if it was something kind of small, and try to learn from the successes and failures of what's happened within this very mysterious, very slippery, very strange field, maybe before making their own moves. But that's up to them.
Right. I have to ask because you kind of hinted at this. We can look back at John Mack. What do you think he did right, and what do you think he could have maybe done a little better?
Oh, that's a good question. Dr. Mack, the head of psychiatry at Harvard, and he was heavily involved at the well-respected Cambridge Hospital, wrote on nightmares and childhood development years before tackling the field of what people think of as abduction encounters and other close contact events. So he was in a very unique position to be able to establish whether people were experiencing sleep paralysis or experiencing nightmares or having another issue that might be related to childhood development, because he was a noted expert in those areas already. I think that he was right in that he had the confidence after looking at the available material, and then to look at his own prior experience to say that there was something fundamental and real to what was happening here, that there was something fundamentally real that was happening, and that he continued with confidence in that. You know, some people fault him for the level of confidence that he brought into this area, and I'd have to suggest that given the tenor and given the amount of animosity that he faced in the early 90s through the early 2000s, he really that confidence really buoyed him. And so, you know, for other people, other doctors, other mental health professionals out there, I would suggest, you know, the stigma has broken down to a great degree since then. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better. And you know, when we're getting to the point where we're talking about the actual reality of recovered craft, recovered biologic material, talking about bodies, talking about beings that are non-human, um, we can really embolden ourselves to the point where moving forward, and even right now today, um, people can start operating from the space of not building the case of whether there's a reality here, but saying, okay, this is real. What do we do now? And I think that one of the great strengths of Dr. John Mack is that he already then, 30 plus years ago, was able to say, okay, this is real. What do we do now? I think if there's a weakness to John Mack's work, it might be that there are a lot of people that have challenges with relaxation therapies, like hypnotic regression, and that's understandable. It's a challenging topic. It's important to remember that even though that's always tied to him, the idea of hypnosis, he tended to prefer the term relaxation technique, and it was a very light form that he was really working with, and that many of his cases didn't require that at all. And a lot of the recall was done in a waking state. So I guess that if a weakness of his might be that he allowed himself in some ways to get tarred with the subject matter in ways that were unhelpful for him and for some of the other experiencers. I also don't know, he would go on TV shows with some of the people that he worked with, and I believe that he thought that he was well intentioned in doing that, and I know that could be pretty traumatic for the people that he worked with, the experiencers that would go on stage with him, and I admire their bravery, and I can understand why he was looking to do that, and also that TV producers can be very convincing in terms of the kind of sensationalistic material that they'd like to put on television or out on the internet or whatever. So I guess that's another point to grow with, that if there are mental health professionals, if there are doctors watching this that are thinking about moving into this space, that they remember to be careful and to not let media producers, even to the level of podcast producers, really kind of push them in a direction that they don't feel comfortable with going, and that they can embrace that there's a fundamental reality with this while still resisting coming to concrete, solid conclusions about anything specific at the same time. Does that make sense?
It does, because I think that was one of my responses to, because I started reading one of his books, and my thought was, if he was doing this purely from a clinical perspective, it would have read as more neutral. Like, this is what
Mm-hmm.
is being presented and this is how I'm treating it. But I didn't read that way, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
and clinically we need to be more neutral. What
Mm-hmm.
we believe about it, what we feel about it, shouldn't have adjectives attached. It shouldn't even be mentioned. Like, the client should never see what we believe when we're working with them. We should be a blank slate as much as possible, in my opinion. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that for me was one of the weaknesses. Like, you don't want them to say, "Yes, I'm going to believe everything you say." He didn't initially, and then when he
Right.
did, of course, he got jumped on by a lot of people for that, because they said that I think they said something like he went wild or something. I don't know, something weird
A lot of
and
things were said
derogatory.
along those, or yeah, that he left the reservation and all sorts of things like that. Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
of things were
just
said. Yeah.
so yeah, I think from a clinical perspective, I would just encourage people to be mindful about neutrality. As we said earlier, mindful that the beliefs should be, your client's own, and you don't have to bias them one way or the other. And also, I just want to emphasize what you said about exposing your clients. He
Mm-hmm.
did it in a book, he did it on TV, and I've spoken to some people who have been on TV, and I don't know that they gain anything from that. They probably do it hoping that something will be gained. I know one person spoke about their medical issues on TV, and they were very frustrated when no help was given to them afterwards. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so the people who, for instance, come on this channel to talk about their experiences, we do it in
Mm-hmm.
the hopes of educating doctors and mental health therapists. But I'm also, cognizant of their rights. So if they, feel uncomfortable or want their video to come down, I'm going to do it. Like, that's their right. So we have to keep that in mind. So
That's a great way to think of things, and I also understand, like you were saying, about people wanting to be seen. I think that people, there is the relevancy of people wanting to be heard, especially if they feel that their their views have and that their history has been maligned or ignored through much of their life. So I understand people wanting to be heard. I understand people wanting to be seen, and I do know that there are a decent amount of experiencers that do want other experiencers to know that they exist, right? that they're not the only other person that has had XYZ happen with them. And I absolutely understand that inclination, and I think that it's uh, and it's also having um, kind of come forward as a more public person, having had anomalous experiences myself. It's a very it's very heady. It's very challenging, and I would caution folks that are thinking about kind of making a splash in any way, shape, or form with that, that it it takes a lot of thought, and you have to be careful about the context with which you're putting yourself out there sometimes, or not. You know, different strokes for different folks. Um, I, Along those lines, though, I'd like to say that, you know, I think one thing that mental health professionals should might really get a lot out of is focusing with their clients about how much or how little they feel that they can speak with their loved ones about their anomalous experiences, and whether they can be open with them, and what are strategies um, to be able to talk about these anomalous experiences that they've had, because that can make or break many relationships. And there's reasons to be careful online, and then there's reasons that are could be quite beneficial for people to do it in their own home, for example. And so
Right.
that that would be one topic that deserves a lot of thought, a lot of consideration, and a lot could be gained that way, so that people don't feel alienated, so that people can feel supported, and that more kind of interpersonal disclosure can happen in a way that helps the community and helps our culture grow in an organic and safe and good way.
Right. I think, I think a lot of people do come forward also because there is safety in numbers. And it's just one of those methods we have used when we expose people to things, they become more comfortable with normalizing it.
Hmm.
However, if you don't have a fairly thick skin, it can be really rocky because, you put yourself out there and people jump all over you and say, oh, that's nonsense because they don't. And for whatever reason, it could be they don't want to believe, they're not ready to
Hmm.
hear your story. It
Hmm.
scares them. There's could be so many reasons for that reaction.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I
So,
go ahead. I was gonna say I
oh
agree with
no,
you. Getting family support is really key, and I would encourage people to try to role play how to talk to those family members or friends about this. Mhm.
absolutely. I think role play would be a fantastic example. Being able to workshop those ideas about how to broach these topics, possibly with other experiencers. It's something that comes up in the support groups that I lead in the experiencer group often, um, and almost every week it comes up at some point. Um, and it could also be an area of growth, and an area where mental health professionals, you know, this could be something that could be worked on in couples therapy as well. So you know, I could see a lot of different strategies that could be helpful, and we could use more. So the more thoughtful minds on that issue, the better.
Right, because it's great for people to have other people around them with this shared experience, but to be able to come home and say, I had a rough day today because I had a kind of a flashback of something, or I had a rough
Hmm.
day today because I miss my experience, who knows what it is, because some
Yes,
people are fine, like they're excited about it, so just to be able to have that conversation would be really helpful and supportive. And I want to point out that when we talk to people about this, it's really just a lot of different types of reactions and experiences. Not everyone feels in any way negative. I know in my experiences, for the most part, I feel like they're it's part of nature. It's pretty natural to me. Like that's not a typical response necessarily, but I just kind of when I saw you, I just kind of shrugged. I was like, okay, I got to keep driving now, So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, so everyone's going to respond a little differently, and have different motivations even for talking about it. And I think we need to respect that people are individuals, and we need to
Hmm.
stop trying to lump every experiencer together with all the other ones in that sense, and stop trying to fit our ideas into a little schema all the time, So,
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Completely agreed.
okay. Well, could you please let people know once again where they can find you? Mhm.
Sure. Yeah. They can find me uh, on they can find me on Instagram if they'd like. I'm not very active on there. They can find me on X, aka Twitter, uh, and my handle is at JAYC King78. I'm sure we could put it on the show notes or in a comment. Um, the Experiencer group can be found uh, at www.forexperiencers.com, forexperiencers.com. It can also be found at symbol for experiencers on Twitter, aka X, these days, as well as on Instagram. And yeah, so please feel free if there are any experiencers yourself out there that are looking to have a community of people to talk to. If you're looking to compare notes, or if you just like book clubs and dream study groups, or you'd like to join a support group, please feel free. Once people are vetted in through 3 simple questions, uh, get and those are: where did you find out about the Experiencer group? Show us a link of anything online that shows who you are, and we leave that open ended. And then the third question is: tell us a little bit about you and your experiences. People can answer that as simply as they'd like. And with that, we let folks in the door. It's a 2-month trial period for us and for them, to see if it's a good match. And then after that 2-month period, people can pay what they wish to contribute to the site's infrastructure and the events and other things that we offer up. And yeah, so www.forexperiencers. Love to have you.
Okay. Thank you again for everything that you do. I truly appreciate all the insights that you provided today for the people who are looking to support experiencers, and hopefully for those who will one day have to support experiencers when more and more people are honest about those experiences. And thank you for just coming and talking to me today. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Deb. It's great to have you in the community, and I'm so happy that you're doing this important work. Thanks very much
Thank,
for having me.
of course. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who listened. Take care.